All right. Well, welcome back to the Rice Report, everybody. Sorry, it's been about 10 days since I put a video out here. Went on family vacation, got some time away from my phone, which is much needed. I highly advise all of you to take 5, 6, 7 days, as much time as you can away from your phone, get into your life, touch some sand, touch some grass, get some sun. It's such an important thing for us. I'm joined today by a tremendous guest. I think you guys are going to love when he goes through his background. You're going to understand who he is. But more importantly, he's going to help break down from the inside what's been happening in Wall Street, what's changing in the world, what's happening with Bitcoin, how the world is evolving. And most importantly, I think one of the things that's great about having Darkside on with us here today is the fact that he's a free flow. Like there's going to be no gloves here. He's going to give his unfiltered opinion on what's happening in the world. And we had a great conversation this morning on one of the Twitter spaces. It was about the American dream, right? The American dream has been to own a home. That's what we've been pitched since we were a small kid. I actually looked it up. The slogan came into play in the turn of the century, then into the 1900s. It amplified after World War II, and it's just been stronger and stronger and stronger. And we live in this generation of kids right now that are living in a melting ice cube environment. The dollar is down 10.7% since the beginning of the year. So your 4% savings account before inflation is actually negative 6% right now on earnings or on savings. And this American dream, this philosophy of the most important thing, the best thing that can happen to you in your life is to own a home, is being trumped right now by liquidity. I talked earlier this morning and I said liquidity equals happiness. You can live in any home, you can rent it anywhere you want. And this is where Bitcoin really came onto the scene. It's really changing the scope of things. My house would have cost me about 42 Bitcoin when I bought it. I could buy it back again today after having doubled for about 13. That is a deflationary asset that Wall Street has hated until the last year and a half. And there's very specific reasons behind that. So I want to welcome Darkside onto the podcast here today. I'm going to keep his name hidden from you. He's not hidden in face, but he's hidden in name. Can you give us a little rundown of your background and before we go kind of set the stage for this conversation, which is going to be very deep for the people who are watching?
Sure. And thanks so much for having me, Eric. I've been looking forward to this. We've been talking about it for quite a while. Um, so yeah, my background, I started in the late 80s, and I think it was 89 on the floor of the Philadelphia Options Exchange. On my 21st birthday, I got a seat on the floor. Began trading in Philadelphia, worked my way out to San Francisco, traded on the Peak Coast, traded upstairs for Sutro. I sort of brought my options knowledge to an over-the-counter trading desk, equity trading desk. That was fascinating. Uh, Ended up meeting my wife in San Francisco. She was from the Midwest. She was ready to move back to Michigan. I said no to Michigan, but yes to Chicago. Of course, they had the CBOE, which was sort of the major leagues. And moved to Chicago, got a seat on the floor of the CBOE, traded down there from I think 96 through about 99. 99, with the kind of the Y2K craze and the internet bubble kicking off into full swing, I moved upstairs and began trading a show desk, and we had still working for the same concern with tons of market makers on all the different exchanges, but we would get the information that they were seeing on the floor and we would trade on that information, which was really interesting. My old boss used to say, the seat on the floor, what you're really paying for is information,
Yep.
not the ability to trade, but the ability to see order flow. And certain order flow, when you begin to understand it after 10 years, a dozen years, you begin to figure out real quick which order flow tells you something and which order flow doesn't. 2001, 9/11 hit. I lost a bunch of friends. I had a bunch of friends at Cantor. It was really hit me hard.
Me too. Yeah.
And yeah, it was a terrible event. And
I was going to take a job with Cantor 4 months after that happened. I was scheduled to move to New York to do that.
Yeah, it was brutal. And I decided to pack it in and retire for a little bit. And I stayed out of work, and we were raising our two kids, born in 99 and 2000. And spent some time touching grass and with the children. And then 2004 decided to come back in a different fashion. I had so many connections from my work that were now big time traders across Wall Street, hedge funds, banks, institutions. So I decided, the one thing that bothered me most about trading on the floor was the lack of agency. And then with electronic trading coming on, the agency fell completely apart. What little agency there was gone. And what I mean by agency is that if you're working even at a sophisticated upstairs hedge fund and you're going to call for a market and you call Goldman Sachs, they're not giving you the market that's best for you. They're giving you the market that's best for them, right? And ultimately, I understood options usually better than the traders that were giving me orders, and I would be able to take their order and fashion it in such a way that, if Goldman was showing them a 15-cent wide market, I'd show them a 7-cent wide market,
Mm-hmm.
right? And bigger markets, because, it was right down there on the floor with Susquehanna, with Jane Street, with the biggest players in the game. And yeah, I parlayed that into a really large business. Now, around 08, 09, things go absolutely insane. Obviously, while the world went into the Great Recession, my world was never busier, never crazier, because the volumes were off the charts.
Mm-hmm.
But what bothered me more than anything else was that as we got from 07, 08, 09, the electronic trading was bigger and bigger and bigger. And all of the electronic trading platforms, whether it was Susquehanna, whether it was Goldman Sachs with Ready, whether it was Merrill Lynch, whether it was HITS, the CBOE terminal, whatever platform you used, they were designed to route orders to where it was best for the broker, not where it was best for the client. So now we're back to the
Shocker.
agents. Yeah, we're back to the agency problem. And I said to myself, first of all, the algorithms they're using aren't very good, right? They're very basic, rudimentary. Whereas in the equity markets, TWAP, VWAP, very advanced algorithms were proliferating. In the options market, this didn't exist. And I said, I'm going to build an options trading platform, an algorithmic trading platform that's based around agency.
Mm-hmm.
And I set out to build that product. We launched a company by the name of Dash Financial. Then quickly, Dash became one of the largest options execution platforms. We had the most sophisticated algorithms. And even today, I left in 2013. I think today it's the largest options execution platform on Wall Street, if not the largest, right
I
there at
think
the
you're right.
top.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it was a crazy experience. It was a frustrating experience for me, because I was focused on agency. I was focused on the algorithms. And I made a lot of enemies, as I'm sure you can imagine. Right? It wasn't
Yes.
about making friends. Um, so ultimately, 2013, I think it was early October of 2013, I'm heading over to Spain to meet with Banco Santander, take them to a Real Madrid Barcelona football game. And I get on the flight, and I remember it was a midday flight. I wasn't tired. I went to the magazine store at the airport, and I bought, I don't know, 7, 8 of those big computer magazines, back in the
Yeah.
day. And we take off, and I start reading one magazine, reading another. I think it was the third magazine I opened. Right in the middle of it is the Bitcoin white paper. Like, what is Bitcoin? I'm like, this is interesting. So I go ahead and I start reading this white paper. Now, mind you, I'm a technologist and I'm building algorithms. So the entire concept of distributed ledger technology was fascinating to me,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I start reading this thing, and I read it once, and I'm like shaken up. The entire concept of proof of work and DLT, just all of these different components combined to make this product. And I remember sitting back and going, okay, I'm going to read it again and again. And I think it was my eighth time through through the white paper. It's time to land in Spain. So we land in Spain. We go to the hotel. I download an app called Local Bitcoins, I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
and it knows my GPS. This is early iPhone days, right? And I click on some guy, some random Spaniard. I meet him behind. I went to the ATM machine. It would only let me take out 500 euro. I queue in. I want to buy 500 euro worth of Bitcoin. Some random Spaniard meets me behind the hotel in Real Madrid. Felt like I was doing some kind of weird drug deal. And within 10 hours of uh, of reading the white paper the last time, I'm a Bitcoiner, and I procured my first Bitcoin. Um, Look, I have to
Non
be honest.
KYC too. The best Bitcoin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, so anyway, the story gets, I have to be honest, right? When I saw Bitcoin for the first time, what I saw was an asset that could be easily cornered. Okay, so I looked at this, and I'm thinking about the first thing that flashed into my head was the Hunt brothers, the
Yeah.
silver squeeze, right, in the
Yep.
70s. I said, well, why couldn't 8 hedge funds get together and just buy up the Bitcoin and then just start marking it higher, right? Like, and market infinitely higher. That was the first thing I saw from Bitcoin. So I'm thinking to myself, well, this is very interesting, right? The technology is amazing,
Mhm.
but I didn't really see the practical application of Bitcoin as money, right? I didn't make that connection because, again, I'm a Wall Street guy, right? I'm 24 hours into this experience, and the first thing that comes to my head is someone's going to corner this,
Yeah.
right? But
In a
what
week
amazing,
too. It wouldn't take long back
yeah,
then. Yeah.
back then it would have been super easy, right? So I went from there to thinking, wow, distributed ledger technology, this is really a distributed database, right?
Mhm.
And if you remove proof of work and you just look at the concept of being able to store data distributed and then shard the data, right? So you remember like an X-ray as an example, right? That's just zeros and ones, right?
Yep.
It's digital, and I can take a few of those zeros and ones and put them here, and few put them here, and few put them here, and the only way you can put them back together, right, is if you have the ultimate key.
Mhm.
So I began thinking to myself, wow, like my biggest fear at Dash at the time, I'm a CEO of a self-clearing broker dealer. Well, I'm executing for some of the biggest firms on Wall Street, both hedge funds and banks. How much would somebody pay to get from my back office a printout of all the trades? Well, it's
Mhm.
invaluable, right? To
Yep.
know what people are buying before anybody else. And I had no way, zero way of securing that data. Like there's no such thing as encryption. The cloud is not safe, right? I understood cybersecurity, I think, at a deeper level because it was a real concern of mine. So
Sure.
I went down the rabbit hole of encrypted databases, everything. And the reality is anybody can dump the back end of a database, right? And they have all of the keys, because the encryption keys have to live in the environment with the database or it doesn't work.
Right.
Right? And that's why I really don't believe in encryption, right, as a science, because ultimately you have to present the key, and whenever you present the key, somebody can man in the middle the presentation of the key,
Mhm.
right? That's why end-to-end encryption, I'm not a big fan.
It's a philosophy. Yeah.
It's a philosophy, right? So yeah, so from there, 2 weeks later, I left Wall Street for good, and I started a firm by the name of Alter Software Solutions, ALTR. It's still very successful today, and the concept was to create a next level data security system around distributed ledger technology and the ability to shard data, the ability to take binary large objects, X-rays, pictures, log files, and put them into multiple ledgers, right? And then, therefore, because we're storing every log file, there's no way to go back and cover your tracks. So I
Right.
built an insider threat mitigation system, and that's what Alter is today. It also had all types of rate limiting. It's a very sophisticated system. So that was 2014 to 2019. In 2019, I exited Alter and retired and became a full-time Bitcoiner.
I mean, it's such an interesting and opposite story. So in 2014, I was presenting at a tech summit in Los Angeles, and I was more in the social media space and sentiment. So we were doing sentiment tracking, which ultimately got used for S&P 500 tracking, which a lot of you guys on the floor use today for trades. And 2014, somebody said, "Eric, you learn stuff really quickly. Our Bitcoin guy just dropped out. Can you do a Bitcoin presentation in 3 days?" I said, "Sure, nothing could be that hard. 3 days, no big deal." Dark, it was the worst Bitcoin presentation in the history of Bitcoin. I had no idea what decentralization was. It was the first time I was introduced to the term. I had 3 days, mind you, while I was running a company. So I gave this presentation and I was like, yeah, Bitcoin's interesting, but like, I don't understand why anyone wouldn't ever use the US dollar. This is just going to be here forever. And 2021, I started getting into Bitcoin. 2022, I was 70% of my net worth in Bitcoin, right at that $17,000 mark. So I got very fortunate to be there. But it does change things because I brought up the housing, the American dream of the house early on for a specific reason. Is that we've been sold these pipe dreams by Wall Street, by the banks, that are all traps. Everything that we're taught, like the average American right now, most of their net worth is in their house and in a 401k plan. And I'm just going to run through chronologically. It's the reason I bring up, the timeline of things. 1913, you have the Federal Reserve Bank, you have the IRS, and then you have 1933 Securities Act, the 6102 that confiscated gold, sold it off, stored some in Fort Knox. Theoretically, we haven't seen that proven at all. Then you move into the 70s where you go off the gold standard. Immediately after that, they created the 401k tax avoidance plan. Then 1979, they launched the credit card. This was all put in place to trap people, and I'm explaining to you why, because you're going to get deep into like how all this stuff really works. When you tell people to put their money into a home, which is primarily financed by debt, you're basically telling them to put themselves into debt and pay that debt off over time. It is an illiquid investment. Home equity is sort of an illusion. You need a loan to get it. You can't just push a button and get it, which is why people are turning to Bitcoin for liquidity. You have the 401k plan, which by itself is a trap unto itself. You know, right now, if you have a 401k plan, federal taxes on the highest income earner right now is 37%. If history stays in line with where it is today, 15 to 20 years from now, when I would technically retire and be able to pull my funds out of a 401k plan, I would be paying 48%. So why would I save money and sacrifice liquidity at 37% to pay 48% later? Now, I understand the capital gains and trades and all that stuff. But if you look at the standard American portfolio, it's comprised of illiquid long-term tax avoidance that provides zero comfort and zero prosperity to the American. It's all a long-term dream. Where I think you're seeing Bitcoiners right now, the average Bitcoiner that I talk to is constantly on a vacation somewhere, right? There's always somebody like you're in Montana, you live in Las Vegas, you go back and forth. I just went to Florida. I've never had so much peace as I have right now. And my fascination with Bitcoin was completely different. So when I started looking into this, I'm a conspiracy theorist. So I started looking into, I understood the banking system. I was a Wall Streeter and a trader as well. So I understood how flawed and broken that system is. And then I got into telling the truth, which is like the worst business in the world because you make no money. You actually lose everything doing it. And I had been debanked in the past. I'd been censored, kicked off of stuff. I'd been through all that stuff. And what I was looking for was a way for me to be able to control my own destiny. So I went into gold, in 2017, 2018. I was like, this is a great investment. I became a gold bug. 2021, a friend of mine who's now my business partner, one of my best friends, comes over and he goes, you got to learn Bitcoin. And it's like the 50th person that told me I needed to understand Bitcoin. And I go, listen, I looked at it in 2014 for 3 days. I'm a total expert. I've got it all in lockdown. Well, I spent the next 6 months totally entrenched in understanding this. And for me, the thing that was fascinating is the decentralization. So when you're talking about a distributed ledger, which is a term a lot of people use because that's what it is, what decentralization really is removing central power unto itself. Like right now, the Federal Reserve controls it all. Their computer systems store it all. The DTCC controls all of your stock, owns all of your stock. They own everything. You're a proxy owner of everything. Bitcoin by itself is the largest computing network in the history of mankind with absolutely zero chance of replication. So when you looked at Bitcoin and you said, a big market maker, some big money is going to corner this and own it in like 6 weeks. I said, well, that hasn't happened. But then I looked at the hash, which is a variable rate. Like hash rate is basically the overall computing power, the amount of guesses being made by miners on a daily basis. It is the security of the network. When I looked at that, I said to myself, there will never be another Bitcoin. When you have hash rate at 800 exahash, 700 exahash, all the biggest computer companies in the world could do 3 to 4% of that, maybe, if they pulled all their power. And they wouldn't have enough energy, and there's not enough equipment available for them to compete. So I hear all the time, and I'm sure you hear all the time, this is the next Bitcoin, right? Even if they're proof of work, like a Texit coin is one that came out now. It's an exact replica of Bitcoin, the same exact system. Their hash rate is like barely a pentahash. And people out there may not know what this means. 700 to 800 exahash would require hundreds of gigawatts of power at some stage, about $30 billion in equipment, real estate, electricity, and know-how to be able to take over the network for like 5 minutes. I mean, it's impenetrable at this point. It's grown so fast because there are hundreds of thousands of computers, there are 24,000 nodes that are running the actual ledger, running the network. And there are millions of computers around the world in every country in the world mining Bitcoin. This will never be replicated. So you caught onto it from a magazine on a flight to Spain to do TradFi business. And within a couple of hours, you were a Bitcoiner. That's the most fascinating turnaround that I've ever heard in any of the Bitcoin stories. But walk us through this Wall Street illusion of how they're kind of cornering people and how Wall Street really works. I think that's something everyone needs. How does the banking system work? You call our system a Ponzi, which I agree with and don't agree with. It's a fraud. It's a fraud of every category. But walk us through like the basics of Wall Street and the banking system and our fiat system.
Wow. Yeah. Well said. I consider you a conspiracy factualist, which is a little different than a theorist, but
I like the term.
my
I've learned to love it.
myself too. So let's kind of walk through what is Wall Street's business model, right? So Wall Street's business model, I think, boils down to two kind of schemes. One, I think, is skimming, where they take a percentage of everything that goes through the machine. And the second is rug pulling, where they take everything that you have. Right? Those are the two, I think, primary schemes that Wall Street relies on. Skimming being the obviously the biggest one in the group. Um, so yeah, look, transparency in Wall Street, right? They make money on the lack of transparency. I always, I have to remember when I came into the business in 1989, there were four options exchanges, right? Today, I think, I don't know, 17, 18. When I left, there were 14 options exchanges. Well, why do we need 14 options exchanges? And I'll give you the answer is the SEC has what they call the best execution price. It's the best execution rule. And what that rule says is that if the CBOE is offering an option at $1 and the ICE is offering an option at $1 and BATS is offering an option at $1, right? All three of those are considered best execution because they're the same price. $1 is the best price available in the market. However, the three exchanges have extraordinarily different business models. As an example, at the CBOE, right, they might pay payment for order flow. At BATS, they may have a taker maker model, where if you take the liquidity, they pay you a credit. If you make the liquidity, they pay you a debit, or you pay a debit. Now at ICE, it may be the opposite way. It might be maker taker, right? So the fees, the net price is different on all three exchanges. But the SEC rule says no, they're all three the same, right? So where is the agency, right? There is none, right? They're going to route your order to where it's best for the broker dealer who's routing your order. So they can capture the fee. They can capture the payment for order flow. They can capture the credits that come back from adding or taking liquidity, right? And that's why they've proliferated into so many different exchanges, all with different business models, because they're exploiting the best price rule, right? They're
So
taking
they win every time.
They win every time.
Every bet that's made in the world, Wall Street wins. And when you're talking about skimming, they collect a fee of every transaction you do as an investor. So every time you make a move, they get paid. They never lose.
Remember, when the commission is zero, you're the product, right?
Yeah.
That's what I like to tell people. So, as I watched commissions get down to zero, I was telling people, look, you're better off paying a commission and being able to route your own orders, right? Than this zero commission stuff where you're going to get a bad fill and your broker's going to get a kickback of some form, right? And this is just one little tiny example of a system gone wrong, right? This is true in the equity markets. It's true in the derivatives markets. I mean, we haven't even started to get to annuities and all these other kind of bullshit products.
We will. No, you're right.
The other day I saw, a friend of mine whose father passed away. They had a small insurance policy, and the mother got a annuity sent to them by not a small bank, one of the largest banks in the world, if not the. They sent them, hey, look, we can take this $500,000 and we have an annuity for you, and it's a 4.5% annuity. And I said, just send you the paperwork. So I would read the paperwork. It has a 6.5% front end load, which means they found a way to turn $1 into 93.5 cents before you even get started.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, they get $30,000 right away.
Just ridiculous, right? And this is not coming from some bucket shop. This is coming from the premier bank in our country. Okay, so you need to step back and ask yourself, right? What are these TradFi guys really up to? Do they care about you for 2 seconds? Is there really agency? Does your financial advisor give one hoot about you, or are they only concerned about them their bankroll, their commissions, their position inside the firm, because let's face it, their position inside the firm grows as they grow their commission base,
Right.
not their book of business, but their commission base, right?
How much money they make, not their
That's right.
clients.
Exactly. Right. And look, the entire system is broken. Right. It is, if it wasn't broken in 2000, by 2025, it is completely broken to the point that, look, the GameStop people, they'll tell you what happened when they turned off the buy button, right?
Yep.
How can you turn off the buy button? Well, you can if one of your major participants is in trouble and they have more power than the clients.
And they have
Um,
political influence over the central control.
Yeah, and there's another equity out there people will know, NMTLP. That was a famous short squeeze where they absolutely hosed all of the owners of the asset and basically took all their money from them, rather than allowing a short squeeze to happen. So all of these things kind of add up, right? It's one after the next that the system just continues to degrade itself till you get to the point where we're at now, where it's really a rigged system, right? And let's kind of go back, since you mentioned the Ponzi scheme, right? So I
But
always call.
before we move into that, I think it's important to pause here because we talked about annuities, which is perfectly in
Mhm,
line. If many of the listeners will know what an annuity is, but annuity is like a 401k plan without an income tax deduction.
mhm,
It's another way of capturing your liquid capital, making it illiquid for a long period of time with a tax incentive that pays very well to the broker dealer, kind of okay to you. Like 4.5% is basically a savings account anymore. But you got to understand that's on a product that's losing 10.7% since the beginning of the year. So your 4.5% annuity is actually losing almost 6% in actual buying power while it's completely illiquid. So there's another way to add it into there, right? So we have houses, illiquid, 401k plan, illiquid, annuity, illiquid. And 63% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 expense if they needed to do it right now. But they have a 401k plan, a house, and maybe an annuity as well. This is liquidity is the biggest problem in the system, which is created by the Ponzi scheme. So now I'm going to give that back to you.
yeah. So why do we have a Ponzi scheme? Why do I call it a Ponzi scheme? Because it's a debt-based fiat Ponzi scheme, right? The monetary system is based on debt, right? And I would ask anybody who's listening, why does it need to be based on debt? But to understand how debt works, right? I think it's important that we break this down and just let's cut through the fancy jargon that you'll hear from the Federal Reserve. Let's suppose Eric and I decide to start a debt-based monetary system. And the first transaction in our debt-based Ponzi scheme is I go ahead and I write $1,000 loan to Eric at a 10% interest rate for 1 year. Okay, so I've created $1,000. I hand you 1,000 paper dollars. You owe me 1,100. But there's a problem, right? A big problem. Only $1,000 exists. How are you going to pay me back the 1,100 when only 1,000 exists? And the only way you'd ever be able to pay me back is if I create another loan to somebody else. So let's say I go ahead and we'll use imaginary Fred, right? I make another $1,000 loan with the same terms to Fred. Well, now there's $2,000 in the system. There's 2,200 that has to be paid back. Granted, one of you can pay me back because one of you could get your hands on 1,100, but both of you couldn't pay me back because there's not the extra $200 in the system. So what do we have to do? We have to create more debt, right? And the concept that you can ever pay down debt in a fiat-based Ponzi scheme is ludicrous, because if you do, the money won't exist to pay off the interest on existing debts, and you would cause a deflationary spiral, the likes of which everybody would start defaulting on interest payments,
Mhm.
and that would cause the economy to absolutely crash. So when our politicians tell us, no, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we want to pay down debt, and they go through all these maturations, it's all lies.
Yep.
My favorite lie in the entire system is something called the debt ceiling, right? You're familiar with the debt ceiling, right?
Very, yes. Yeah. It is
Yeah,
an
well,
ultimate illusion.
well, I would take it a step further, because every Ponzi scheme requires deceit, right? That's one of the functional properties of a Ponzi scheme. Well, the debt ceiling is pure deceit. Because as we've just laid out, you need to create more debt to pay back existing interest payments. So the
Right.
concept that we would say, okay, well, we're $37 trillion in debt, 38's the limit. How? Right? How? That that leaves me bewildered, right? There is no debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is infinite because that's how the fiat Ponzi scheme is built. We need more debt to pay off the interest on existing debt. And as these numbers get bigger and bigger, now in the trillions of dollars, I think we're going to have $1 trillion in interest coming
Yeah.
up on this next year. Yeah, so
Yep.
this number grows exponentially, right? It begins to grow at a pace that you can't possibly fathom. Even the number of trillion, I can't fathom,
No.
right? If I started on the day I was born, assuming I could count on the day I was born, I started counting, right? One, two, three. I would get nowhere near a trillion in, let's assume I lived to 80 years,
Take you
right? If I,
32,000 years.
yeah, 32,000 years to count to a trillion, right? So people, the level of deceit, and again, this is why I go with the Ponzi scheme label, because I take that seriously. There is so much deceit, so much dishonesty built into this system that the average American, the average European, like, and the average individual on a fiat Ponzi scheme has no idea
Yeah.
what's going on, right? But we understand it, right? It doesn't. Once you can kind of dig in and figure it out for yourself, you understand that this inflationary Ponzi scheme, right? It can only go on for so long, right? Eventually, it's going to blow up, and when it does blow up, it's going to be catastrophic. Now, let's add Bitcoin into the mix, which is a deflationary monetary system, right? And you end up with two systems that are antithetical to each other that, for all intents and purposes, cannot peacefully coexist.
Mhm.
And I think it's important right here, Eric, to go back. Remember how I said that I saw Bitcoin as something that can be cornered as an asset?
Yes.
So I think it's important to discuss, when did I make the transition to looking at Bitcoin as kind of magic internet money that could be cornered, to a monetary system that can change the world? Because that's the key piece, right? That's
Yep.
that understanding that gets you to become a Bitcoin maxi. So in 2019, when I retired from Alter, my wife and I had decided to get a 45-foot RV, big bus, a big
Love
rig,
it. Love it.
and we spent the next 5 years traversing the planet, or not the planet, but
The country.
the country. And we had a great time. I mean, we went to, I think, 47 states, every state but North Dakota. Um,
What's wrong with
never went
North
up to.
Dakota? Come on. Why you
I've
don't leave them
I've
out?
been no, I've been to North Dakota, and it's really a really cool place, like
It
Roosevelt and
is
everything.
beautiful there.
We can talk about North Dakota, but um, we just never made it up there in the bus. And but other than that, what we did was spend time meeting people. Right? This wasn't about us. It was about us educating ourselves on the country and learning what is America about, and spending time in the deep south, spending time in Florida, spending time in Maine, spending time in the West, a lot of time in the West, spending time in the Northwest, and seeing everything. But more importantly, was meeting the people, right? And getting to hear the American story, right? And it became very clear to me that the American story was a broken one. And,
Mhm.
and I'll just back up. I'll tell you this. In 1984, right, as a young high schooler, I took a bicycle trip from Seattle to New York. It was a 2-month trip with five
Wow.
guys. And we flew to Seattle. We bicycled basically I-90, right? The service roads, and occasionally on I-90, all the way across the country. And I
You did a
remember,
Forrest Gump. You did a
yeah,
Forrest Gump journey, except it
yeah,
was on a bike.
on a bicycle.
That's
And
cool.
I remember going into towns. I mean, I can rail off some towns that we went through and that we spent time in. And these towns were absolutely magnificent. Single A baseball, everybody coming out. Like, we would drive into these towns and we'd become like rock stars for the night, right? Until we found a place to camp, usually in the town park or on a farmer's lawn, right? And then in the morning we get up and we move on to the next little town. And the towns were vibrant, right? They were full of energy. High school kids, young kids, parents coming out, touching grass with their kids. Um, it was an amazing summer. It was the summer of the '84 Olympics in LA. I remember that because we lived on, I don't know if you remember the '84 Olympics, but they had the
Yep.
little Monopoly cards at McDonald's that
Yeah,
they gave out, the scratches. Well, the Russians didn't come, they boycotted the '84 Olympics, you probably remember.
yep.
And the US ended up winning almost all the medals. And these cards were like gold, right? We had stacks,
That's
I mean,
right.
literally this high stacks of
And McDonald's
free.
was actually healthy back then, and it tasted really good too. That's another.
Yeah,
Yeah,
healthier, right? Um, but yeah, so we spent a lot of time living on McDonald's and going through all of these towns all the way across America. Now, kind of fast forward to 2019, I'm like, you know what, honey, let's go do that trip again. I'd like to actually do the same trip I did in 1984. And let me tell you what I found. I found burnt out towns, right? With the only thing left was a Dollar General, maybe a Family Dollar, right? Methamphetamine, nobody out playing in the town parks, everybody indoors. The world
dilapidated
just,
buildings.
everything, man. I can't tell you how much it changed me as a human being. I knew it was going to. Like I knew from my experience on Wall Street that the world was being ruined. But when I went out and saw it for myself and saw the devastation, right? The the level of just pure degradation of society. It hit me so hard, right? And you've met my wife.
Yeah,
We were absolutely blown away. I was trying to explain to her, like, wait, this used to be unbelievable in this town, and now it's gone, right? And the people are still there, but they don't come outside. It's dangerous. It was really really sad. And it didn't take me long to kind of land on broken money. Why am I seeing this? It's because they broke the money, right? They created a playing field that favored only the richest people on the coasts, and everything in between those two coasts became just devastated,
damaged
right?
goods. Yeah,
Damaged goods. So yeah, that was the realization that Bitcoin was going to do something that I didn't see in in 2013, right? So I now look at Bitcoin and I'm saying, wow, this is crazy. This is going to change the world. Now I'll tell you this: in 2013, I had bought a nice stack of Bitcoin, but I was a gold bug. I was a gold bug from 2002, so I had stacked a whole bunch of gold and silver, and that was my thing. Well,
same here.
Bitcoin comes along and I buy a bunch of Bitcoin and just put it away. And where that ends up is in 2013, I'm 97% gold, 3% Bitcoin. Right at a point in 21, at the highs in 21, I'm 90% Bitcoin, 10% gold. Right. And I'm like, what, like, this is just crazy. But the good news is I'm living in an RV. I have nothing, even if I took the money out, I have nowhere to spend it, right?
Right,
We had I mean, you live a simplistic life when you live in an RV, right? You buy a shirt, you have to throw one out. There's no room for more stuff.
right.
So, you have two, three pair of shoes. That's it, right? Like there's no buying crap
Something
when you live on
refreshing
an
about
RV.
that.
Yeah, it was the whole experience, right? Taught me, low time preference. It taught me, what had happened to the or to the US, right? I learned so much from my 5 years in the RV. I can't even express in words what it meant to me. So then I began to look at Bitcoin more seriously. I began to study it, and then of course we go through FTX, Celsius, the whole 9 yards of choke point 2.0. Now, my personal opinion was that FTX was engineered, Celsius
Agreed.
was engineered, right? This was purely a governmental action to take down Bitcoin,
Yep.
and it failed, right? I mean, it worked in the short term. Genesis, right? All GBTC. The whole thing was a threat to what was a tyrannical regime, and they wanted to take it down. And they did a good job of hurting a lot of people, but they did
Yeah.
not take it down, right? And once we get through the Biden regime and Trump comes along and he decides to end choke point 2.0 and embrace Bitcoin, and digital assets for that matter. My view was, okay, this changes everything. So the night Trump gets elected, November 8th of 2024, I am sitting up here in my house in Montana and literally had tears in my eyes, right? Not because I'm a Trump sycophant, as many know I'm not, right?
Yeah, same here.
I'll criticize a lot of what goes on there.
I have one idol, and he's in heaven. That's it.
Yes, and that's a great point. But um, I was emotionally moved that this freedom of speech was going to come back, right? That freedom of an economy would come back, like freedoms, real freedoms. I know you know this. You were debanked. You were kicked off social media, as was I, right? This concept of freedom became so important to me, right? And I was really moved. So the ninth, that I stayed up all night on the eighth. I mean, I was up until 2, 3 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. So the ninth, I stayed here, and then the 10th, I drove back to Vegas. And I was driving back to Vegas, and I was listening to a space, a Bitcoin space. It was Gary Cardone was hosting. Now, I've never tweeted about Bitcoin. I've never talked about Bitcoin. Nothing, right? Like I've just been living in my RV lifestyle. And Gary says, "Hey, is anybody out there a quant?" Now I'm a quant, right? That's what I did. I was an options trader. So I hit the request to speak button, and weirdly enough, he called me up, right? And I said, Gary, I'm a quant. He goes, well, start talking to us about this. Start talking to us about that. And I went on a 30, 40-minute rant, as I'm sure I'm capable of, discussing MicroStrategy options, discussing, all different
Nobody breaks down
volatilities.
financial products better than you. Honestly, I was in the
Thank you.
business for a long time. Really, nobody does it better. You should listen to Dark on Spaces, breaking down option strategies, Misty, all these derivatives of Bitcoin. At the end of the day, he's a cold storage Bitcoin guy. Don't forget that.
Yes, for sure. And by the way, a cold storage Bitcoin guy from 2013 that just left it alone, right? The best trader is a dead trader in many
Yeah.
cases, right? So anyway, so I hop up on Gary's face after about 40 minutes, it's over, and I hop down. I'm like have this energy, right, that I haven't felt in years flowing through my body. And all of a sudden I got follower. I think I gained like 50 followers, maybe 75 followers on that. I've never had followers. My follower count was probably 15, right? And I'm like, wow, this is cool. And the next day, I was back in Vegas. I hopped up on Bitcoin Today, which was Fred and Wayne, and they let me up. And then ever since that day, so November 10th last year, I've been off to the races. And I've gotten so much energy out of sharing my experience, my strength, my hope with an audience of look, the Bitcoin community is different. You know this, I
Yes.
know this. Like if you've ever worked on Wall Street and then you get exposed to the Bitcoin community, one of love, one of acceptance, one of wanting a
Cooperation.
cooperation, wanting things better, right? Like everything about this community is so special. I became addicted, right? And that's in my ADD personality to just jump right in. And I really couldn't put it down, haven't put it down ever since, right? Love running spaces, love participating in chats, love doing podcasts, love talking about, things that I have domain expertise in, specifically derivatives and what I would call fiat Bitcoin, right? So we now have an entire world of fiat Bitcoin, and very few people understand it. I would argue that even the geniuses on Wall Street, they don't understand what they're getting themselves into,
I agree.
because they see this as a traditional Wall Street asset, and
A
it's not.
siloed product. Yeah.
It's not. It's infinitely scarce. And traditional Wall Street products, you can always print more. You can always grow more grains. You can always mine more gold. They only know inflationary products. They've never seen this before. So this deflationary product is going to rock their world. It's just a matter of time, but it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
We're going to get into that in just a minute, but I will say this. So I was doing Telegram chats, during the 2020 election, the fraudulent election, which I will probably get another suspension on YouTube for saying that. By the way, there's way more views than what are here. Even my analytics show it. They still kind of do this stuff. You were the first space I went onto on Twitter. So I was on Twitter. I put 2 posts out in 2020. I got a suspension. I just said, you know what? I'm just going to leave it here. Maybe the battlefield will open back up at some point when Elon came on. We got a chance to go back on. So I kept my account, and which I had for years for business. I mean, I didn't really take Twitter seriously. But the first space I went on to on Twitter was yours. So on Telegram, you know, there's conspiracy theories everywhere, which some amazing people on there too, by the way. There's also some nut jobs, and that's true on Twitter. That's true. That's true in America. That's true in the world. But the overwhelming thing that I kept hearing was, you know, Bitcoin's going to zero. It's run by these guys, and all the ghost stories. So I love the ghost stories. I listen to them, and then I do my own research. And when I came to the conclusion that math is math, it doesn't matter who owns something where the keys have been broken off in the lock, and that it's completely run by millions of Bitcoiners around the world, I was kind of, you know, caught. But your space was the first space that I went on. I don't even remember what happened in the first space, but now I'm seeing you guys every day and every night on Bitcoin Today and all that kind of stuff. Let's get into the derivatives market. So from my point of view, and again, I'm not an OG Bitcoiner or anything like that. I'm more of an economist by nature, or a watcher on the wall, if you will. And from my perspective, I look at this as a fortress. Like, if I want my buying power, my monetary energy, the energy that I've accumulated in my life, the things I've stored up to give to my children, I want it in the most safe and secure environment in the world with scarcity. And I think those are the 2 big things about Bitcoin that draw people there. Immediately, it's the scarcity number go up. You know, there's only so much of it, so the more people buy, it gets more expensive over time. For me, it was the actual protection, anti-censorship, and anti-confiscation. So no one could take it, no one could silence it. I can, even if I was persecuted by a tyrannical government, I could still buy something anytime I wanted to. That freedom is really what was interesting to me. Or if I said something that the former regime didn't like on YouTube, they couldn't freeze it. My transactions are still going to go through, because a miner somewhere and a node holder somewhere are actually going to approve my transaction without government oversight. That was kind of the most interesting thing to me. But now you start to see this new narrative shifting. So the narrative, and I can go through it. I mean, I'll actually do this because it's a fun exercise. I keep this on my phone because it's hilarious to me. I should have had it up for you earlier. I didn't know it would go here, but you know, there's a whole specific guideline of how you take something that the establishment doesn't want. You know, first you make fun of it, which happened with Bitcoin. Oh, it's this magic internet money. Then you have the blockchain, not Bitcoin, right? That's still a prevalent, you know, 2017 narrative that's gone forward. Then you have, who's Satoshi? You know, we got to know who Satoshi is because we need an idol to worship. And there are people who worship, you know, Satoshi and not God, which is fascinating to me. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter who made something that's decentralized. So it's like math and physics 101. When something is fully decentralized, which we have. To be honest, I don't like the fanboy Bitcoin things either. We have centralization concerns, like mining pools and things like that are concerns. If you're interested, you've done a great job. I think I've done a pretty good job of breaking down how the mining pools will never centralize Bitcoin because it defeats their own self-interest. I mean, it doesn't make sense to kill your gravy train. Maybe there's some government that's willing to pay $1 trillion to make that happen, but I've never seen that government. But when you walk through this timeline and you start seeing like what Bitcoin has become, then there's this whole new wave of Bitcoiners in 2020. Remember, the price dipped really strong down to 16. It went right back up to 20 in the 20s pretty quickly, really quickly escalated into the 40s and 50s and then stayed there for a while. Now, at that time, you had MicroStrategy was already buying. You have all these other companies that are buying Bitcoin treasuries. You have options pools being created, income products being created off the options written against the treasury company, specifically Strategy. And then you have a new wave of people going, well, Bitcoin's totally captured now, not understanding that BlackRock buys on behalf of customers. Customers can withdraw funds at any time. I suspect by the end of the year, there will be in-kind withdrawal. So if you buy on iBit, hopefully by the end of the year, you can get paid back in Bitcoin. So if we go to that perspective, it's really not Bitcoin buying anything. They're just getting 25 basis points because Wall Street always wins. They don't care about Bitcoin. They know that you need Bitcoin and they want to be the custodian and collect their quarter of a basis point fee. But we talked about this in the space the other day. If you really look holistically at all of these Stripe and Misty and all these other things that are being built into a Bitcoin ecosystem, what they're doing is they're setting up the largest short squeeze in human history, and it's being orchestrated by the enemy. It's almost like the perfect trap. And of course, the conspiracy theorists will say, well, they're doing it for the ultimate Wall Street rug pull. That also doesn't make sense because, again, it defeats their own self-interest. They actually make a percentage of your assets as they go up every year. Why would they crash something that's a gravy train? It doesn't make much sense to me. But this ecosystem, you explained it really well in a space the other day, and I really want you to explain that to the audience. When MicroStrategy is buying and MetaPlanet and all these other companies, they're buying and they're holding. And if the government begins to buy and hold, you have an even scarcer asset that now hopefully won't have taxation if you decide to spend it. Because another thing that brought me to Bitcoin that was fascinating to me is I always thought it was like a NASDAQ stock, right? Like before I really dug deep. But then I started realizing I can't spend my NASDAQ stock at Steak and Shake. So I have a bearer asset that moves like a stock that has the safety of a bond in many, many areas, technologically protected, not protected by guns and bombs. But then I also have a bearer instrument that I could spend anytime that I want to. I mean, it's really its own unique category of asset out there. But explain that web that's being woven right now between the SBR and MicroStrategy and all these companies, because I think that's the strongest play in Bitcoin that no one's talking about is the long-term game theory.
Yeah, so I think that's great. Well laid out, Eric. There's some serious microstructure issues coming down the road for the Bitcoin complex because they have gone ahead and built a significantly large derivatives complex based on Bitcoin. And when I say that, I mean that strategy, while it's not a derivative, it derives its value from the Bitcoin
Right.
price. And so do all these other treasury companies. Soon we're going to have additional structured products, right, that are going to derive their value from Bitcoin or outright hold Bitcoin, a la 21, and many more to come, right? And we're going to see bit bonds, which are going to sequester Bitcoin, right, essentially escrow it, and take it off the market for a period of 5, 10 years, whatever that bond may be. You're going to see home mortgages where that Bitcoin is sequestered against your home, right? You're going to see Bitcoin built into other real estate products, a la Grant Cardone, where that Bitcoin is sequestered from the marketplace. So where does this leave us? We have a bearer instrument, right? And this is really important to understand that when I started in '88, my first job was at a bond house, right, municipal bond house. And I remember, people coming in with bearer bonds. They'd actually bring the physical bearer bonds into the house, and they have little coupons on the bottom, and you can clip the coupon, right, take it to the bank, and the bank would pay you the interest, and they would cash in the coupon. Well, these bearer bonds were soon outlawed. And I said to myself, well, that's weird. Like, why is the government outlawing a bearer instrument? Right. Well, I got my answer soon enough. I was very young at the time, but the government doesn't want you to be able to take possession of assets,
That's right.
period. Right. So we could argue, do you really own your home? Right. Do you really own anything?
Do we own our
Right.
stocks? How do stocks work?
So we definitely don't own our stocks. So when you buy a share of Apple, what you're really buying is a claim, a legal claim on the broker dealer. So if you use Robinhood, you use Charles Schwab, you use Morgan Stanley, you have a claim on that corporation. That corporation that bought the stock on your behalf, they have a claim on the DTCC, the Depository Trust Company. The DTCC, which is a member-owned organization owned by the largest banks in the world, they own your share of stock. Okay. Now, with Lehman Brothers failing, there was some uh, precedent-setting legal cases, J.P. Morgan versus Lehman Brothers,
Mm-hmm.
where the courts ruled that J.P. Morgan, as a senior claim holder at the DTCC, does not owe the client of Lehman his securities, even though the client of Lehman didn't go bankrupt. Lehman went bankrupt, but
Right.
the client had a claim on a bankrupt entity. So they have already built in the precedent for what is known as the Great Taking. Right, this is a book and a video series done by David Rogers Webb. I encourage everybody to go out and you can find the video on Rumble,
You're one of the
YouTube.
only other people I've ever heard in public forum talk about this, by the way. The Great Taking is mandatory reading in 2025.
Mandatory. And it's funny is I met David Rogers Webb when I was building the brokerage business. I flew out to Cleveland. He was running Shaker Heights Capital at the time. And I had a dinner with David Webb. And I remember that dinner specifically because he was the most down to earth Wall Street person I had ever met.
Hmm.
But usually when I would go out and do one of these client dinners, they order the $500 bottle of wine. They just don't care, right? And
Right.
that wasn't him, right? I took him and a bunch of his traders out, and they couldn't have been more like respectful, honorable, upstanding people, down to earth, wanted to learn what I was thinking. They were thinking men, right? Like they weren't playing the Wall Street game. So yeah, that was my first exposure to David. And when he wrote The Great Taking, and I watched it, my first exposure was watching it before I read it. Wow, right? Like he's done his homework. He went through the legal cases. He has laid out the exact formula that will be used to seize assets.
Yeah.
Right? What is the Great Taking? Will mean they're going to take your assets. And he even points out that you can buy a car, as an example, and you can pay off your loan. You can buy the car with cash, right? But the reality is that the dealership may still have a loan on that car.
The VIN number, it's tagged. Yep.
That's right. So in the case of your car that you think you own, the reality is the bank has a claim on it. And the
Just like
bank
JP
is
Morgan had a claim on
that's right. And
Lehman.
the bank is senior to your claim because they were first in line, right? So look, we're going into a very scary time.
But to make it
Now,
scarier, he actually specifically says in the book, and I think in the video, because the video is, it's 75% of the book.
mhm,
But I think he also says in there that the way they would set up the Great Taking is using blockchain, cross-border payments, and tokenized assets. Those were the three things that needed to be laid out for them to seize all assets. The World Economic Forum has this saying of you'll own nothing and be happy. You already own nothing and you're miserable. You just don't know that you don't own it, and you're
that's
miserable
right.
already.
Unless you own,
Continue. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
unless you own Bitcoin, right? So
That's
Bitcoin
right.
comes along, and Bitcoin is this asset in self custody, a bearer asset that the government that is a neutral reserve asset that no government controls. It's decentralized, meaning no government is in a senior position to take your Bitcoin other than with a gun. And even then, they can't really take your Bitcoin. They can shoot you,
Yep.
right? But they can't necessarily get your private keys if you don't want to give them up. So we have this dichotomy developing between a totalitarian state and a sovereign individual. And this has created for me an immense opportunity to teach that people need to get into bearer assets, right? Because in the world that they've created, now I don't think this would happen under a Trump administration.
No.
Then again, I'm not sure a Trump administration could stop it because the DTCC, right, is essentially an NGO,
Yeah.
right?
It's
Like if you
private.
really, yeah, it's private, it's owned by the banks, and they have the right to recapitalize themselves in the case of a financial crisis. And I'm not sure what Trump could do to stop that train once it leaves the station, right? So while I think
Good
the
point.
risk of the Great Taking has been reduced, it certainly hasn't been eliminated, not by
Right.
any stretch of the imagination. And I find it fascinating that Wall Street as a whole ignores this, right?
Yeah.
They ignore the fact. Now, even more interesting is David Rogers Webb has spent the last year, 2 years going from state to state, trying to get legislation passed at the state level to prohibit the taking of assets. And what he finds is when he goes to the state legislatures, the banking lobby is there to meet him, big bank, and they're there to shut him down. He's had zero success. He's gone to Wyoming, he's gone to South Dakota, two states you would think would
Would welcome him.
easily would have welcomed this concept and said, "Hey, we got to protect our citizens." Denied. The banking lobby was there in force. They understand what they have, and they're not giving up their real estate, right?
That's
And
right.
their real estate is the ability to take your assets. So, I talk about this quite frequently. Look, you don't own your stocks. You
No.
don't own your bonds. All
You
you
don't
own
own
is a
your home.
coin. Yeah, and that's right. So your home, as another example, even if you own it in cash, right, it is subject to local property taxes. And they could decide tomorrow to take your property taxes to a level that nobody would pay them, so that they're greater than the value of your home. And now what do you do?
Yeah.
right?
Not that they
Right.
would,
So,
but they certainly could. There's nothing prohibiting it legally, depending on your state. Depending on your state.
yeah,
But most states don't have a cap.
and even if they did, they could change that overnight, right? Like
True.
that's right. You really have no, in a world where we talk about you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, right? We're really set up for some type of an event where you'll own nothing and be really miserable if you're not already.
And there's people that'll call it doomer. This is just reality. Like we're literally talking about actual legal precedent. Like it's been set. They already have these things in order. For me, the most fascinating thing from that book was exactly what you talked about: is the car confiscation.
Yeah.
Just constantly thinking, well, I paid for my car, I paid for the plates, I paid for insurance. But if the dealer folds, my VIN is attached to the loan that the dealer got to get the car to me. And if they wanted to seize the dealership and all of his inventory, it's still listed on there. And even people who work at dealerships, when I mention this to them, they're like, no, that's not how it works. And then I send them like, hey, go back and look through your books. And they'll come back to me and they go, yeah, you're right. We didn't remove the VIN number from our actual loan for the inventory. That's literally how it works. It's not
Yeah.
scary stuff. That's why bearer assets that are unconfiscatable and uncensorable are moving in value. And I think we don't move for a bit in Bitcoin until this financial net is laid out. And I think MicroStrategy was obviously the kickoff. But now seeing senators, U.S. senators, trying to remove taxation on small Bitcoin transactions, that floods the system with new users. That introduces sound money into a broken system. It's kind of like releasing a virus into a broken system. And at the same time, we just had Bo Hines today, literally in Congress today, saying that we are reassuring you that our purpose with a strategic Bitcoin reserve is to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible. Explain to us what this means, right? This whole derivatives infrastructure, the financialization of Bitcoin. Some people get mad. Like Bitcoiners will DM me and say, like, hey, get Dark to stop talking about this. And I'm like, just listen and put the pieces together. When you put the pieces together of why all this financial infrastructure is being built around a singular asset, you start to understand, number one, that's maturity. That's how an asset matures. If Bitcoin was just magic internet money, there wouldn't be, a $4 trillion derivative market around a $2 trillion asset. It just wouldn't exist. Wall Street wouldn't waste their time. But at the same time, it's setting up something really beautiful that you and I both kind of see. Will it come true? We have no idea. I don't know what tomorrow brings. I've read the book of James. Do not boast about what tomorrow brings. But what I'm seeing from a game theory perspective is fairly undeniable. Walk us through that. You're brilliant at doing this.
Yeah, so as these derivatives have proliferated, and one thing you need to understand about derivatives markets is that they require the ability to buy the core asset, the underlying asset, and they also require the ability to sell short the
Right.
underlying asset, right? And you can't sell a put unless you can sell the underlying. And so it requires what we call a free flowing short stock market or short equity market or short Bitcoin market in order to have a functioning derivatives market. So, it dawned on me about it 2 weeks ago when I was sitting back thinking about Misty, thinking about MSTR, watching these Bitcoin treasury companies come along and buy up $1 billion of Bitcoin, knowing that Bitcoin bonds are coming around, knowing that Bitcoin real estate is coming. Right? All of this Bitcoin being taken off the market is going to lead us to one place, right? Which is that there won't be enough Bitcoin available to short, right? This is a bearer asset, right? So you can take it and you can take it off the market. You can't do that with your
Right.
GameStop stock. You can't do that with other equities and bonds and derivatives. But with Bitcoin, you can remove your stock, your Bitcoin from the marketplace. And as more and more Bitcoin gets sequestered, as I was talking about earlier, we are marching headlong into a catastrophic situation. And what that's going to look like is we're going to get to the point where you can't short Bitcoin, where all the Bitcoin available to be shorted has been shorted, it's been lent out. And this is where Bitcoin differs so much from gold. Right? Gold is held in a central vault somewhere controlled by a bullion bank. And for all we know, they've lent the same gold out 100 times, 200 times, 500 times. But Bitcoin has a blockchain, right? And that blockchain will tell us that once we know that, let's say, of these treasury companies, they own 17 million Bitcoin. Okay, well, there's no more Bitcoin. The ability to audit and verify this network occurs every 10 minutes on schedule, usually,
Sure.
sometimes.
Varies. Yeah.
Varies, but on average, every 10 minutes. So, look, we're heading face on into a catastrophic chasm. Now, if you don't believe me that Bitcoin requires a free flowing short Bitcoin market, I would proffer to you that the reason that Michael Saylor sold so much ATM stock last year, so much, 21 billion, I believe, if not
Hmm.
more, was that he knew and he understood for him to have the options market that he has today, for MISTI to be able to do what it does, for all of these different products to exist, right? Strike, convertible notes, whatever he has planned in the future, they all require you to be able to short MicroStrategy stock.
Right.
And in order to short MicroStrategy stock at that level, you need a lot of stock into the marketplace. And that's what he did. He sold $21 billion worth of common stock, making sure that it's freely available for loan, that you're not going to have a short squeeze. It's not going to turn into GameStop, right? There's plenty of stock out there. And if that market did get tight, meaning somebody bought up all the stock and wouldn't loan it, he would just sell more
Right.
because he wants to keep his derivatives market free flowing. Well, that doesn't work in Bitcoin because there's nobody to sell more. There's nowhere to get more, right? What is it? 94% of all the Bitcoin's been mined,
Yep.
right? They're just picking up, little pieces in front of a steamroller at this point. So once we hit the point where there's not enough Bitcoin available to short, what's going to happen? Well, the futures market is going to dislocate from the price of spot Bitcoin. So spot Bitcoin might be trading at 300,000 on the exchange, and all of a sudden the futures start dropping, right? And you see this massive dislocation. You could see IBIT puts trading at extreme premiums while the calls get traded at a discount, right? As this becomes hard to borrow, no one's going to want to sell puts. IBIT stock could become very hard to borrow, and thus you get into a potential short squeeze there. All of these derivative products that require the ability to short Bitcoin, right, all of a sudden go into a calamitous situation. It would be the mother of all short squeezes, right? This would make GameStop, or even my favorite one of all times, the Volkswagen Porsche short squeeze, look absolutely small. And I'm not talking about a 10x move. I'm talking about something that could be substantially more, right? As this entire gigantic derivatives complex crashes to a halt and everybody who's short Bitcoin has to buy it back,
Right.
right? And they may own another asset against their short Bitcoin. Like, Jane Street doesn't just short Bitcoin. They may be short Bitcoin, long IBIT, right? But if they have to buy back their Bitcoin, the price of IBIT doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Because there's a demand for their Bitcoin back. So this is coming. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We're going to see a massive dislocation because Wall Street's never seen an asset that's scarce and deflationary. Every asset they've ever dealt with, they can print more of, or they can make more of, or they can create more of. Bitcoin's the exact opposite. You can't. So yeah, this crash, and not a crash down in Bitcoin, a crash up, right? This is a slow moving car crash, that we're watching. And
For the
I don't,
derivatives market.
but it's going to be for all the markets. What I mean, if Bitcoin zooms up to 100,000 in a week, what happens to the price of MicroStrategy? What happens
Right.
to the price? What happens to the price of IBIT? What happens to all the different, components of the Bitcoin complex? Right, everything goes haywire. Right, everything that was designed to keep things orderly, which is what a derivatives market is supposed to do, right, is to manage risk. Well, you blow up the risk management engine that they've built surrounding Bitcoin, and watch out, right? Just watch out. And I don't think anybody's ready for it. I don't think even the most sophisticated guys on Wall Street understand it, right? But they will soon. They're going to get a lesson. in how a deflationary asset like Bitcoin really can't have a derivatives market that's 4 times its size. It's not possible. Right? It's
I,
going to blow up.
I mean, putting that piece together the other day when I heard that was kind of the final, I guess, piece for my piece, right? Like the piece that I have it comes from sound money. Like that's one thing we do is we work our butt off all of our life, and we have money that loses value every day, and it's just a continuous cycle. And Bitcoin breaks that. I think most Bitcoiners will understand. I think most people understand that. I don't know if they're getting in there. But if you look at the setup where it is right now, you have these huge demand and sequester areas. So you have new buyers, large buyers that are buying it off of the market, sequestering it for 5 to 10 years. And there's no more that can be created. I never actually put the last piece of the puzzle together, which is the fact that you can't short it at a certain point. Shorting it actually becomes an impossibility. Then you have fair
Yeah.
market trade. You have fair market pricing, and nothing will do it faster than Bitcoin. There's I mean, there are other supposed fixed structures which have human beings involved and boards of directors and foundations that could certainly change code. That's not going to happen in Bitcoin. We already have a ops return war happening over spam on the network. So decentralization is fun because it's actually self-governing. Like you're part of the governance for the actual product. But I have never put that together until the end. I never actually equated in my head that in order to short something, you have to own it. And if there's nothing left and you can't own it, then you can't short it, and the price literally goes vertical instantly. I mean, that is fascinating.
I encourage everyone to pull up an 2008 chart of Volkswagen.
Yeah.
And look what happened when Porsche announced that they own 70% of Volkswagen, and everybody who was short it said, wait a minute. And then the hedge funds came in and began buying it. Remember, at that point, when this starts, it's not like it's going to resolve itself easily. You're going to have the biggest hedge funds in the world coming in and buying Bitcoin, and they don't care what price because
Right.
they know somebody else has to buy it. Right. And you end up with a vertical move unlike anything you can imagine. And by the way, if you want to go full conspiracy theory, is
Please.
this move in Bitcoin what triggers the great taking? Potentially. So the DTCC is not just a clearinghouse for stocks and bonds, but they clear the derivatives as well.
Right.
And they clear the over-the-counter derivatives. Remember, the derivatives that we're used to, the ones we see on the screen, right? That's just one piece of a derivatives market that's very large. They also clear over-the-counter derivatives, contracts between banks. Look, we are set up for some real action in the Bitcoin complex. Again, I don't know if it's next week, next month, next year, 5 years, but it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, we can't time that. We have no. I mean, there's one of my favorite sayings is "There's many a slip between a cup and a lip." Like we have absolutely no idea on timing, but mathematically, it's a certainty at some point, whether it's 100 years from now or next week. That's a certainty in a market like this with a finite supply. So you always use a saying, "Get off zero," right? And I think one of the most
Get off
fascinating
zero.
things. Bitcoin is fascinating because, like, I spend, I'm doing mining and off-grid energy and all that kind of stuff. Like, I left a very successful career in the traditional finance space and alternative investments to mine Bitcoin. Like, the energy is what produces profit. So that's really kind of taking the energy experience there. But we have people who are online all day. No one gets paid a penny. It's all evangelicals here that are just say, listen, this is how it works. This is how you should use it. This is what it is. And I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen cooperation where I can go to another miner and say, I'm having this issue, or do you have somebody you can introduce me to for this? And everyone's so cooperative. It's this huge movement of people who are just tired of an old system, that are tired of being pirated. You use the term Ponzi for the Federal Reserve System. And I think people get confused with that because in a traditional Ponzi, you're scamming one person at a time. The new money in pays the old money investor. Well, the people who are getting scammed in this Ponzi are everyone. Everybody is being scammed without their knowledge in the way that the current financial system works. So people will look at Bitcoin right now, and confirmation bias, unit bias are all big, important things. And people will look at Bitcoin and say, it's $107,000. I can't buy a Bitcoin, which is true, right? Not many people can write a check for $107,000 to buy a Bitcoin. What's your philosophy for the new person entering right now? What would you suggest to them to get off zero?
You buy $100 worth of Bitcoin and you hold it in self custody, right? If you've never played with Bitcoin before, you literally buy $100, you send somebody $5, $10, right? You use the network, you understand how it works, right? You don't make mistakes with large volumes of money. But once you have made a Bitcoin transaction at midnight when the banks are closed on a Sunday, right? You understand the freedom to transact outside of any type of regulatory framework, right? In a totally decentralized manner. So that's step one. Then step two is buy $200 worth of Bitcoin or whatever you can afford and hold it in self custody. Get it off of traditional banking rails. I do want to add this, Eric, because I think it's really important. Bitcoin has never been cheaper than it is today on a risk reward basis.
Agreed.
And people will say to me, well, what does that mean? Well, look, I held Bitcoin when it was $60,000. The government wanted to shut it down. They were trying to shut it down, right? The mining companies were going wild. You had Genesis doing crazy stuff. Now FTX, Celsius, we can go right through like just one fraud after the next. And and I believe many, if not all of that was engineered by the government itself that was
Sure.
trying to take Bitcoin down. But now look at the framework we're in today, where sovereign nations are buying Bitcoin. The largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock, is buying Bitcoin. Right? Everybody is buying Bitcoin. Now that makes the risk reward curve very different than it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, right? Even 1 year ago. I would argue 1 year ago, pre-election, man, Bitcoin was scary. Right?
Sure.
If the Democrats had won that election, Bitcoin was in the crosshairs of Elizabeth Warren and her friends. Right? Today, it's out of the crosshairs, and I think we're crossing the chasm where even if they took power in 3 years, I don't think they can stop this. Right? I think people are educated enough. I think the network is big enough. The network effect is strong enough. People understand proof of work. It's become a global neutral reserve asset. And even if one government tries to take it down, they won't succeed.
Yeah, I think it's so important to talk about the decentralization piece too. Uh, we got to wrap up on time here. I'm almost done. I'll do another episode on just decentralization and what that means, like how important it is. Every miner in the world is literally a security guard and an accountant. I mean, they're hashing that provides security to the system, and then you have millions of people who are doing accounting based on cryptography, which can't be lied to. It's such a fascinating thing, and I think you might be right. I think Bitcoin may be the only life raft from the Great Taking. I really believe that because every other blockchain is going to have human influence upon it. So, and they are going to, per David Webb, they are going to use stable coins, tokenized assets, cross-border payments, and blockchain to steal everyone's assets. Which, the tokenized asset space is interesting for some. It's a very interesting thing for Tidal. Has, in my opinion, has 5 or 10 years before it's developed and used beyond stocks. Stocks, I think, will be tokenized very quickly. But when you're talking about real estate, there's so many legal issues and who's in charge of it, who actually has custody. But every time I talk to you, man, you pop something in my head, and I don't need anything else in there, Dark. I don't need anything else in there swirling around. But now I keep thinking to myself, maybe the statement you made a minute ago, I'm going to dig into that. We'll go over that on a space. This has been an absolute
I'm
pleasure.
By the way, I'm thinking I'm right on that one. I think the Bitcoin derivatives unwind will be so big and so strong that it will take down large financial institutions across the globe. That would lead to the scenario of the great taking. I just want to touch on the real world assets and the tokenizations of stocks because I have a real vision into this. I was CEO of a self clearing broker
Mhm.
dealer, right? So the concept of tokenizing stocks really doesn't make that much sense to me.
No, me neither.
It's utopian, meaning wouldn't it be great if I actually could take delivery of my Apple stock and I owned it and I held it in self custody, right? But the reality of a clearing operation is that all transactions they have to have a dispute mechanism, right?
Hmm.
And in order to have a dispute mechanism, you don't have final settlement, right? Bitcoin offers you final settlement. You send your friend Bitcoin, guess what?
It's
It's
gone.
his. It's gone. You're not getting it back. He can send it
No
to whoever he
clawback.
wants. There's no clawback. In the equity markets, in the derivatives markets, in the housing market, right? We have courts, we have actors, regulators, we have all of these different officials that need the ability to reverse transactions.
Hmm.
If you're going to trade a regulated asset, let's take Nvidia stock, and you're going to tokenize it, and it's being done today, by the way. I think
Yes.
Ondo's doing it, a couple other chains are
Ondo.
doing it. Yeah. Um,
Aave is tokenizing reinsurance products right now as well. I read that the other
yeah.
day.
But all of these things have a central oracle, right? There's somebody that has to be able to be there and
Avalanche,
say,
I'm
no,
sorry.
yeah, yeah. Aave doesn't have an oracle, but that's a different story. I don't
Right.
think it does. But yeah, the in order to tokenize real world assets, you need a dispute mechanism. And as long as you have a dispute mechanism, meaning somebody in charge of the blockchain that can reverse transactions because they were ordered by a court to do so or ordered by a regulator to do so, well, how is that any different than what we have today?
Right.
Right? What exactly are we changing and why?
Nothing.
Right, nothing is the answer.
You've
So
just made it a video game. That's all.
thank you. Thank you. And maybe it trades faster and it trades 24/7, and maybe you eliminate a middleman, right? Like maybe the market maker, but I would argue that the market makers will be there because if not, there's not liquidity. So I don't think anything changes.
I don't
Right. Matter of
either.
fact,
Yeah.
the game probably gets worse, not better.
Oh, it can
And,
get
and
way
I,
worse. Think about tokenized real estate, right? So say everyone on your block tokenizes the title of their home, and I'm BlackRock. I can write options against the upside or downside of your entire neighborhood, manipulate the price of your home, and then make you an offer once I've driven the price down. There's so much that needs to go into that, and it's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. I give like the altcoin market credit; it's
yeah,
creative.
but it's going to happen, but not to our benefit. So,
Of
so
course
I'll give
not.
you another example. Okay, in a utopian world, I could buy a condo complex like Grant Cardone, right? I'll buy a big condo complex for $100 million. I could tokenize it, sell pieces off at $20,000 a piece, and then after the token sale is done, the asset would freely trade.
Right.
However, without a functioning market maker, right? What would happen on day one to the price of my token? The first person that needs to sell, there's no
Crushes the
buyer.
market.
Yeah, of
Yep.
course. And what would happen to Grant Cardone is his $85 million property would now be worth 45 million in one day because somebody had to sell and somebody showed him a half price bid and they just said, I need to sell. If that's the best bid, I'm selling it. Right. And then the last price is the new value. So why would Grant Cardone want to take his property and put it into a tokenized world? Well, the answer is he wouldn't.
Right.
Right. One of the things that makes Grant's empire so successful is that he has investors that are long-term, good, solid investors that aren't looking to sell or flip or make a quick profit. Right. They're in this for 5 years. They take, whatever, $100,000, they put it with Grant, and they're in it for a 5 to 10 year period, right? Until that project sees its way through and maybe, it gets refinanced or something at a later date, and then you get
Right.
your money back or it gets sold. So this concept of tokenizing real world assets, tokenizing the pizza shop, tokenizing businesses, it sounds great. It's
Yeah.
utopia, but it's really silly, right? Because anybody who's ever built a business knows that the quality of the investor, what we call the quality of the money that comes into your business is really important,
Absolutely.
right? The last thing you want is an investor who's looking for a quick profit. That's
Hmm.
catastrophic to you as an entrepreneur. So, look, I've thought a lot about tokenized real world assets. I can't come up with a single use case, not a single one that makes sense. I mean, I guess you could argue US Treasuries,
Yeah.
maybe, but they trade just fine as it is today, right? It's a problem it's a solution without a problem, right?
Well,
So
it's a Wall Street solution too. So the only real benefit is you can trade them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so they can collect more fees on transactions. I mean, that really is that is the incentive to make it happen, and it's
yeah,
going to
well,
happen.
one group of people wants to take the market making function away from another group of people,
Sure.
right? So maybe Goldman Sachs wants to take Citadel's business, or they're going after Jane Street, or they're going after this one, and by moving all of this retail business onto this digital platform, now Merrill Lynch makes the money and not
Right.
Susquehanna, right? Like, but in the end, nothing changes. Again, I don't see where it changes. You can easily trade stocks 24/7, 365 if they wanted to today. But guess what? Guys like me who worked hard, right? Like, we don't want to, right? Like that concept that I have to be up 24 hours a day, that was no, thank you.
No. Yeah, a former trader myself, and like the
Yeah,
probably the worst possible scenario is going to bed at midnight and waking up at 5:30 in the morning to go trade, and you've lost 60% of your earnings and you had no idea. Like, it's
that
a
is.
dangerous market, and it's primed for jackals. Like, they already know all the bits of data that they need, so they can say from 2:30 till 4:30 in the morning, no one's trading. That's when we're going to go in and punish something in the morning, buy it back at noon, drive it back up, and sell it again. It really does open the door. 24-hour trading opens the door for massive market manipulation, bigger than we have today.
Now, going back to what we were talking about, the short Bitcoin issue, everybody needs to realize that these very sophisticated trading shops are using MicroStrategy, because I think strategy is really important. They're going to play an important role in this. But realize that strategy trades, what, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week?
Hmm.
But its price is derived and has a relationship to Bitcoin.
Hmm.
And Bitcoin trades 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Okay. So if you own options, if you own Gamma as an example in MicroStrategy, you want to trade MicroStrategy against the strategy stock against your Gamma when it's open, but when it's closed, you're going to trade Bitcoin,
Hmm.
right? And you're going to come up with some correlation that AI has put together for you on what the price should be in Bitcoin. And you're going to try to extend the trading hours to a 24/7, 365 day. Now, this plays exactly into what I was talking about. We know strategy has a very fluid short stock market. We went through that.
Yeah.
But does Bitcoin have an add in that perpetual futures that trade on all of these exchanges, the COMEX futures, which trade 23 hours a day, 5 days a week, right? Like, we are getting to a point where the derivatives market is going to be significantly bigger than the Bitcoin market,
Hmm.
and it can't hold it, right? Like, I can't stress this enough.
The
Right?
overinflated balloon.
It's going to, something is going to break, right? And when this thing breaks, it's going to do something to the world that the world's not ready for. Because again, if Bitcoin was trading $1 million today, right, what is the net effect? What actually happens? Well, a bunch of Bitcoiners get rich. We know
Sure.
that. But what really happened? What really happened is you just printed $20 trillion, okay, in net worth, right? Like, you want to talk about the big print. What did we print during COVID? 7 trillion, 9 trillion?
Right.
Imagine Bitcoin 10x in a very short period of time, and you just printed $20 trillion worth of wealth. And that's global wealth. What would happen to, we saw the inflation that came
That
after COVID.
increases global wealth by 4.5 to 5% instantly.
Yeah. Oh, no, you're talking about a situation that would create hyperinflation, right, throughout the globe. And then Bitcoin, and once things start to hyperinflate, now Bitcoin goes from 1 million to 10 million, right? Because where else how do you get out? What is the off ramp to the fiat system that's beginning to break down? And thus we get into the great taking. So I'm just kind of want to
Hmm.
lay out, how this plays out, because you have to think not just through the immediate effect, but the second order effect and the third order effect, and how I see this playing out over time, right? I see Bitcoin as the only off ramp. I
I
don't
do too.
believe gold and
Unfortunately.
silver. Yeah, gold and silver are interesting, right? But they're very heavy. You're not going to be able to transact in them, right? Like, their value will go up, but it's going to be very different, difficult to monetize. Bitcoin will be an off ramp. You will be able to buy something for a sat. And
Yeah.
are we going to get to the point where 10 sats equals $1?
Maybe.
Probably,
Yeah,
probably.
I think it's more likely than not. But I don't try to be the predictor of what's to come with
Yeah, I
price.
do. Yeah, I
But
do. But that's okay.
yeah, you're the trader. That's what you do. I just predict its importance and its role in the world. And when you have the head of the ECB who's under investigation for a $400 million fraud for years and years, just saying we've got to shut off. She literally called it shut off the off ramp. If you knew how bad the world is like we do, and you knew who all the worst players were, which begins with central banks and ends.
Ursula.
It
Ursula.
doesn't really end. Yeah, Ursula. Appropriate name. Isn't Ursula the bad person in Little Mermaid? Isn't that like she's the bad
Yeah.
guy, Ursula?
Just sounds like an evil name.
It sounds
Just the
horrible.
name sounds evil.
Yeah, when you have all these people who've been bashing it for all these years, and she still is. She did this morning. It was something she quoted about Bitcoin being a scam, and everyone has that. And we also have the audience who's like, well, $10 million Bitcoin doesn't make sense. I hope this episode opens your eyes to understand that. I don't know if that'll happen, but the likelihood of Bitcoin hitting, I don't know, $1 million is a hell of a lot more likely than hitting zero. And like those numbers aren't even close anymore. It's been de-risked. When you have a full developed institutional financialized market wrapped around an asset, those are arms that are embracing something that's needed. And the fact that Bitcoin is needed, because as a gold bug, I remember I sold 2,000 ounces of silver not too long ago to buy more Bitcoin. That was the worst. I just realized how old I was because I couldn't really, like 2,000 ounces of gold in a backpack. First of all, you look weird walking around with it. You got to carry a gun and you got to get a check. Like, do you want cash? I'm like, no, no way do I want cash. Give me a check. I'll go deposit it. It's this whole new paradigm shift. You can have a little tiny piece of technology with 40-50 million dollars in it, and you can go buy a hamburger. Like, to me, Steak and Shake was kind of the final deal. Like, I was there. I went 4 times over the weekend. I bought at least 5 people their own lunch. I just sat there and I'm like, hey, are you paying with Bitcoin? No. I'm like, let me buy your lunch for you. And I'll just buy their lunch, show them how fast it worked, got them to open up a River account or something right there. It's fascinating to see the adoption and getting rid of the capital gains tax, along with the SBR, along with the fact that you need Bitcoin to short the market. When that's gone, that is truly the basketball being held underwater. And it's not a theory. A lot of these things are theory. Every altcoin in the world says the same thing. It's kind of like watching a Mockingbird media. So Bitcoiner will come out and say something. The altcoiners will just change Bitcoin to their altcoin. It becomes the new slogan and motto, but they don't have the math to back it up. And the math is all there for Bitcoin. I love get off zero. I tell people, I'm like, get it while you can. And I'm not scaring anyone. There's no imminent short squeeze in the next 6 weeks. You can buy $10 of Bitcoin. You can buy a full Bitcoin. You can buy $10 million in Bitcoin. And it's actually fairly affordable to do if you have the right platform. So storage, the learning curve for Bitcoin is so big. I think people don't realize how technologically savvy you actually have to be a cold storage savage. So people who don't really know how to use email, this is a whole new paradigm for them, which is why IBIT is important. They get access to Bitcoin without having to do the technological work. But I think the Stablecoin Genius Act is going to open up the door for everyone to have to learn how to use cold and hot wallets. And that adoption is, off the hook what's coming with that. When the 40-plus-year-olds start to figure out how to use a hot wallet on their phone and a cold wallet for their savings and totally protect their money for their kids that are turning 5, 10, 15 years old, game's changing. The game is absolutely changing. Did you envision anything like this in 2010, 2008?
No. 2013 would have been my born on date, but no, I didn't see it. I didn't see it until I started in the RV. Right?
Yeah.
That was the eye-opening experience for me of just how bad things had gotten. Look, when you're a Wall Street guy, you live a very sheltered life,
Sure, it's a
right?
bubble.
Yeah, you live in a bubble. Go to dinner meetings at the best steakhouses. You fly first class all over the globe, right? You don't have this frame of reference of just how bad things are getting when your life is getting so good,
Yeah.
right? Like you
The
go into
incentives
these
aren't aligned.
no, and you go into these fiat trading rooms, I do quite a bit, and you realize, man, these people are living in a bubble. You hear Powell's the greatest of all time, Powell's the GOAT, right? Like all of these statements. And you realize, man, these people need to get out of Chicago, New York, San Francisco, LA, Hong Kong, Dubai. Like, go out to Middle America, go to Red Bay, Alabama, go to uh, Quartzsite, Arizona, right? Go to Moses Lake, Washington.
Go to
I can
Gary, Indiana. Do you want
Yeah,
the best
oh boy,
example of
yeah,
downfall?
yeah. I mean,
That's
I've been there. Obviously, living in Chicago,
grew up in the area. Yeah.
I did a 20-year sentence in Chicago.
I
Um,
watched the steel mills close, everyone go poor, the
oh,
Ford plant in Ford Heights shut down. Ford Heights is a beautiful city, and now it's, it's a crack capital.
no,
This is what America has become by offshoring all of our manufacturing. It's disgusting to watch. But the fat cats that are living on the 38th floor on Michigan Avenue, they
that's
don't
right.
notice it because they got a bigger condo this year and probably a personal driver by selling off American labor. And this has been
Yeah.
going on for 50 years.
And they drive by it, right? So anybody
Yeah.
that lives in Chicago drives by Gary, and you see the destruction, but it doesn't process, right? Like, you'd
Yeah.
never think you'd say to yourself, "Well, I'm not going to get off at that. I'm not getting gas there," right? Like, that would be your initial response. Not, "Wow, I should be helping people in Gary, Indiana. I should get off here and see if I can help somebody." Like, you just become afraid. It's a sad time. And you mentioned earlier that phrase "doomer." Obviously, I get called a doomer from a
I
bunch of
hate the
different
phrase. It's
sources.
dumb.
I hate it because I see myself as the exact opposite, right? Like, I think I'm bringing light to people. I'm showing them the off ramp. I'm teaching them how to do it, right? Like, the doomer is the one who tells you everything is fine just the way it is.
Yeah.
That we have unlimited tools. The Fed can continue to do this forever, right? And anybody who's really understood the system knows that's not true. They know it's not true, right? Remember, when we print money and we inflate the way we're doing, and we then spend that money overseas to buy their goods from their cheap labor, are we doing them any favors?
No.
Right? You may think we are, but those people are getting screwed, right? They're stuck in the slave labor game, right? And they can't get out because those governments are authoritarian. If they weren't authoritarian, they wouldn't make goods for us at that price,
That's right.
right? So, I mean, the whole system is built to collapse. So, am I a doomer? No, man. I think there's light, like bit bonds. There are ways to slowly transition off of US dollars and onto Bitcoin in
Yeah.
such a way that we can repair the balance sheet of the United States, right? If we had the proper policymakers doing smart things, and I think some of them may be in place today. Bo Hines is an example. He's
Maybe.
saying the
Well, he's
right
not a
things.
policymaker though. He's more of
Yeah,
an
that's right.
admin. Yeah.
But David Sachs, like, these guys are not stupid. Certainly Scott Bessent, they're not dumb, right? They understand the problem. When we talked about the debt based fiat Ponzi scheme and how that works, they understand it,
Yep.
right? They understand that the whole concept of a debt ceiling is absolute deceit and is ridiculous, right? Like, there's
Political
no
theater.
political theater, right? That's what it is. But I really do think we're bringing a positive message, one of hope, one of love, one of sharing, one of caring, to this community. And I love this community. I'm here every day. I show up, hat
Yeah, you
on,
do.
ready to tell my story. And yeah, look, if I reach one person a day, if I orange pill one person today, if through this podcast we can orange pill one person, what a massive successful day we've had.
Yeah, I think the difference between you have doomers and Pollyanna, right? If you're going to call what I call a realist is a doomer. Like the world is broken. Anyone with eyes to see and ears to hear, just like Jesus said, right? Those with eyes to see and ears to hear. If you have eyes and ears, you realize the world is broken. And a doomer, here's the difference: a Pollyanna who just sees rose-colored glasses, they really want to be right. Every person I know who someone would call a doomer, we all want to be wrong. I actually want to be wrong. I hope that the Pollyannas are right. I really do. I hope that we don't go through hard times. But the good news is that you have salvation in heaven, and you have salvation maybe in the financial market. I know I'm certainly there. I don't want to claim to say that. But again, I'm with you. I don't see another off ramp besides Bitcoin. I don't see any solution to centralization besides decentralization. And I think the Bitcoin network itself will protect us from the AI networks from being centralized, which would be complete tyranny in the end. So if we focus more on that, and like the hard part with decentralization is you have to work with other people. Centralization is really easy. Some guy does everything, tells you what to do, you live your life. We're used to that. Decentralization means you and I have to cooperate and agree. And it was fascinating watching Trump in Nashville in 2024 at the Bitcoin conference say Bitcoin is a modern marvel of human cooperation and achievement. And that was probably the most succinct definition of what Bitcoin is, given by the president of the United States. I mean, that was fascinating to watch, by the way. I don't know. I think you were there. We didn't know each other then, but I think you were there. But that specific sentence, I literally was telling somebody 5 or 6 days beforehand, that's what impresses me about Bitcoin is just a bunch of normal people that decided to work together to create a life raft from a sinking ship, which has been, it's kind of like a Noah, right? It's like your Noah story in the financial flood. So Dark, I've had you for an hour and a half, or hour and 40 minutes. I'm sorry to take up so much of your time. We could probably talk for another
My pleasure.
10 or
My
15
pleasure.
hours.
I love this. We'll do it again soon. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you. It was such a pleasure to meet you in Vegas, and I look forward to us getting together soon.
And thank you for dinner again. I
Oh,
owe
my
you
pleasure.
one, so we got to meet again. I got to
No.
buy you dinner.
No, I owe you, man. Thank you.
All right, brother. Well, thank you guys all for being here today for the Rice Report. Hope you enjoyed this. Reach out. You can find Darkside 2030. 2030 he does not work for the deep state. 2030 is the year that he projected Bitcoin to hit $1 million. That's why. And he's a big Pink Floyd fan, if you can't tell. Also a Grateful Dead fan. So thank you for being here today, Dark. I appreciate you being here. Thank you all for watching this. God bless you all. God bless America. And can't wait to see you again.